I mean, what if you could put 30 cents on a dollar back into the business every single year? That's pretty mind-blowing. This is going to be the future of the economy, and it's cheaper than me going into any single big box store. San Francisco was literally pulling talent from everywhere on planet Earth and bringing it to San Francisco. Now, San Francisco doesn't need to bring in that talent.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Break Free B2B. I am Nick Nelson of TopRankMarketing.com, and excited to tackle a pretty interesting and relevant topic here today. We're talking with Liam Martin. He is big in the world of remote work. He's been in it for a while. He's the co-founder of Staff.com and Time Doctor, and the co-organizer of the Running Remote conference. And he's been very involved in the world of remote work and its evolution and innovation for some time. So we're really excited to chat with him here today. Liam, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm very excited about getting into this because remote work has been going nuts lately, and we got a lot to talk about.
Yeah, no kidding. I'm one of many, I'm sure, who's been working remotely from home all summer. I'm actually in the office, the empty office here today, because I wanted to make sure I could record the interview without my cat sabotaging it. But I think a lot of people are wondering where it's going to be going from here and how we can best prepare ourselves for what's coming down the pike. So just to get started, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into this space and sort of how you got to where you're at today?
Sure. So name's Liam Martin, as you had said before, human being, specifically in Canada right now at an undisclosed location. I have been in my kind of, I'm calling it my COVID bunker, but it's not exactly that. It's just a cottage since February. And got into remote work. I've been doing remote work for 15 years. Got into it right after grad school, failed horribly at grad school. I remember I taught my very first class, and we ended up with, started with 300 students, ended up with a little bit more than 150, and the worst reviews in the history of McGill University's sociology department, which had been in operation for 120 years. Walked into my supervisor's office and said, "I don't think I'm very good at this." And he said, "No, you're not." And I said, "Okay, so what do you think I should be doing?" And he's like, "You got to get pretty good at this teaching thing before you actually do anything fun." So walked out of that and turned that into a tutoring company, which ended up being quite successful, had dozens of tutors throughout North America and Europe. And I was running into another big problem, which was adequately defining exactly how long a student worked with a tutor. So a student would come to me and say, "Hey, you billed me for 10 hours, but I only work with my tutor for 5. Then I go to the tutor and say, "Hey, did you work with Jimmy for 10 hours? And of course, the tutor would say, "Yes, that's why I billed that much." So I'd end up having to refund the student for the 5 hours and pay the tutor the full 10 hours. That was destroying the business, which brought about Time Doctor, which is a time tracking tool specifically for remote workers, so that you can specifically know exactly how long a person that worked for you did a particular task. And we have a whole bunch of metadata and artificial intelligence built into that as well. And we've been running that business for almost 10 years. And then about 3 years ago, we were at one of our team retreats, and we can get into that as well. Remote first teams have like company team retreats where everyone flies into a particular location. Man, we were in some tropical island that I can't even remember the name of right now. We were trying to figure out, okay, well, how do we get to 200 people? We're at 100 people now. How do we get to 200 people? And we started researching that, and there really wasn't any information. There's a ton of information on how to hire a virtual assistant or, how to quote unquote outsource, but there wasn't anything on like building and scaling a remote team. So we said to ourselves, okay, let's just build our own conference connected to this subject. I really like the subject, and that was Running Remote, which has been running for the last 3-ish years. The last one was supposed to be in Austin, Texas, but got canceled due to COVID. Lost about $250,000 on that one. But we are running online events, which is also very exciting too, because I think this is exactly what the world needs right now, is education on how to do this properly, because everyone on planet Earth is now doing it.
Yeah, you were definitely ahead of a pretty important curve there. So on that topic, we can all look at the trends and see that remote work and work flexibility were very much on the rise before 2020 and all of its events. Maybe talk a little bit about sort of the trends you were seeing leading up to this and the impact that you've seen from the pandemic and its effects.
Sure. So 2018, 5.5% of the US workforce was working full-time remotely. The OECD and US Census defines that as more than 4 days a week working outside of the office. So that's a really important qualifier there, because remote first companies, which is what we are, we're in 37 different countries all over the world. We don't have any offices. We work entirely remote. But post-COVID, it's at 58%, which is nuts. So we went from 5.5% to 58%. And we were projected to actually be at 50% by 2027. We literally just jumped, 5 years into the future, which is really what's, to be honest with you, happening with the economy right now. Is a lot of people are talking about how it's the digitization of the economy, right? So you're not seeing in the S&P 500, it's not the S&P 500, it's the S&P 6. It's those 6 companies that are tech companies that are pulling the entire stock market up. And so that is a really interesting phenomenon. We've seen Twitter go remote. We see Google saying they're going to be remote by 2020, or they're going to stay remote by 2022. Facebook is going 50% remote. Shopify, all of these companies are going remote now. And we're really starting to see a tide change, recognizing that remote is not only a better economic decision for employers, but it's also a much better decision for the employee. So there's a really interesting push-pull. And my estimate is that after COVID is over, and I mean vaccine over, we're probably going to float to around 50% of the US workforce working remotely, which is the implications for even commercial real estate is mind-blowing. You're sitting in an empty office right now. I think there's going to be a lot more of those in the next couple of years.
Yeah, the impacts across the board are going to be really interesting. You talked a little bit about how the benefits are being seen on the business side. I mean, for instance, not having to pay for a physical office space is huge for a business. I mean, I think a lot of companies and people are really starting to see these benefits maybe for the first time. Do you think that's going to have a major, you talked about 50-50 possibly on the other end of this. What are these advantages that are kind of coming out that people are really starting to see, maybe some surprising ones?
Sure. So, I mean, in your business, I'm sure it might be a little bit different, but fundamentally, your office lease is your second largest line item on your P&L. So you have people, and then you have the office. That's the second largest cost. On average, it's about 30% of someone's P&L is just tied up into an office. And remote first companies, which before COVID were very, very quietly building much faster and much more aggressively, particularly in the tech startup world, in comparison to their on-premise counterparts, because they didn't have that 30% drag that was on them what if you could put 30 cents on a dollar back into the business every single year? That's pretty mind-blowing. But the biggest problem that people had with going remote, which was actually the biggest problem and still is the biggest problem that Time Doctor addresses, is, well, how do I know what those people are doing if I can't see them? And so that's what Time Doctor fundamentally solves. And then there's a whole bunch of other tools that are out there that can also solve all other aspects of remote work as well. But fundamentally, a whole bunch of people tried this en masse, and they realized that within the first month, 2 months, 3 months, man, the numbers are coming back and they're as productive, if not more productive, than when they were in the office. And that's actually quite counterintuitive, and it's quite interesting. When we look at the research, and there's very little research that was done, but a lot more research that's currently being done, there are more distractions in the office, at home. There's kids, there's your dog, there's PlayStation, there's CNN, there's all of these different distractions that occur. However, if you remove the commute, right, which on average is about 2.5 hours per day for every work person, if you literally just deploy that as sleep, you're going to get a much more productive person. So it's not necessarily that remote work is more productive. It's that you're actually removing a major chunk of your day, which is sitting in a car back and forth, or sitting on a bus or a train or something like that back and forth, to be able to earn that time back. And then on the employer side, employers are kind of recognizing at this point, man, it's just as productive. People are pretty happy. We just did a poll at the Running Remote online event, and we're running the next one on August 12th. We asked everyone, of those who were recently remote, how many of you are canceling your office leases? And 22% said that they're canceling their office leases. And when you think about that, a lot of them are saying, well, we're canceling our office lease, but we still have 1.5 years left, or we still have 2 years left on that office lease. So that actually is a really interesting trigger inside of the economy that hasn't been fully recognized yet because everyone's still getting paid. But within the next 6, 18, 24 months, I think you're going to see like a collapse of the office kind of rental space, the commercial lease space. So there's a bunch of things that are going on, and we really don't know what the future is going to hold, but I know for sure that remote is definitely going to be a bigger piece of the pie.
Yeah, no kidding. It's going to be fascinating to see what happens with all these empty spaces. But I guess that's a challenge to be tackled at another time. So a lot of people are, of course, seeing the benefits of what's happening here on both sides, but there are challenges and hurdles in this space, right? And some very legitimate ones. One thing I think of a lot is, if we move into what I think is going to be the case is a lot of hybrid workspaces where, people are in the office, a lot of people working from home, and you have that flexibility, especially in sort of the near term when, kids are maybe at home from school still, and a lot of people don't have really the ability to come into the office. So for maybe business leaders that are kind of concerned about that dynamic and really keeping a tight-knit team and keeping that collaboration, what are some of the things you recommend to really keep that rapport and that communication strong?
So I think probably we're going to have a couple interesting forces that are going to affect all of those issues very, very quickly. Facebook just announced that 50% of their team is going to be able to go remote. They're also announcing that people that they hire out of San Francisco will be paid a different rate than people that are inside of San Francisco. If you look at the cities that currently have the biggest net drop in over $100,000 plus employees, it's San Francisco and New York, which even before COVID, it was the polar opposite. So what you're seeing is all of these really expensive employees, just in the Valley as an example, Silicon Valley, 53% of all people that work in Silicon Valley are first generation immigrants. So that's an interesting kind of way of understanding what the situation is San Francisco was literally pulling talent from everywhere on planet Earth and bringing it to San Francisco. Now, San Francisco doesn't need to bring in that talent. They can now hire someone in Mumbai for probably $60,000 a year, where they would have paid them $340,000 a year in San Francisco. So you're going to actually see, and I don't like the terminology of outsourcing because at its core, I think it's actually quite racist, to be completely honest with you, because they're doing exactly the same work, but they're not American, right? So if they're working at home on their computer, but they're doing it in Mumbai, it's outsourcing. But if they do it, in New York at a coffee shop, it's remote work. So fundamentally, it's exactly the same thing. You're going to see a massive second wave of remote work, and you're probably going to see the top tier talent in the United States expand their income. So these top tier developers that just were completely dictating terms, they're going to be still making even more money than they were making before. But your mid-tier developer is probably going to be in pretty big trouble because the competition has been intense internationally, but very few tech startups have been able to take advantage of it, primarily due to fear of, well, what are the KPIs? What are the metrics that we can pull out of those people? Are they measurable? But now that we've just run this massive experiment, so we've actually found out, oh, wow, they actually are profitable. We know that this works now, right? The MBAs of the world, the venture capitalists of the world are just like, wow, remote work actually works. This is going to be a massive game changer. And you're going to see a big expansion of remote work throughout the developing world. Now, to your point with regards to culture, I actually think eventually the concept of having a tight-knit team that you see every single day, the unit economics of that will just not work. It'll literally be like a horse versus a car, right? So it's like, I really like my horses and I like to play with them and they're fun and cool and I like to chat with them, but fundamentally a car is just obliterating them every single day of the week. So we're going to move to a more remote culture. So for us, we do a team retreat every single year, obviously outside of COVID, where we fly everyone into a particular location. We do monthly AMAs with me and my co-founder. We do something called Coworker Coffee, where we're randomly connected with one other person inside of the company through a Slack channel. We built that app ourselves. And you can have a 15-minute Zoom call just to kind of talk, about, whatever inside of those 15 minutes. We do weekly video game nights. We actually just bought everyone Oculus Rifts. So we all kind of play Oculus games, and that's all paid time that we're doing to be able to make those investments into company culture. So remote first companies have been doing this for a very long time. There is a way to do it, and it just requires a little bit of extra energy, but fundamentally you're going to see that contact. And on the outside end, what are we going to do with all these office spaces? WeWork, I think, was actually about 2 years too late or too early, right? So there's going to be another WeWork, and it's probably not going to be a disaster like WeWork. I think someone who's smart is probably going to run that business. No offense to those guys, but they were complete idiots. And I have a video, by the way, on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/runningremote, where they had just gone IPO, and I basically broke it down and I said, you know what? WeWork's probably worth about $3.5 to $4 billion. And they were opening at, I think, 40 to 60. And I was exactly right, which was cool because I put the video up before the whole collapse happened. But, there's going to be a business like that pops up. There's going to be these interspace, like sort of, it's like an office. It's like a floating desk type of system. And companies are probably going to buy, just like we did with WeWork, we would buy 6 open desks globally throughout their entire network. So anyone inside of our company could literally log in for the day and say, I'm taking a desk in Mumbai, I'm taking a desk in New York, I'm taking a desk in Toronto. And then we would be able to get up to that capacity. That's absolutely going to happen in the future. There's going to be a company that does that, and they are going to be a massively valued company because at least 50% of the workforce is going to have that type of need. They actually have it right now, but they can't do it because there's a scary virus outside.
Yep, right. I think it's a little bit of a more natural shift for like a tech company to make this move, right? You've mentioned Facebook and Twitter. Have you seen maybe some industries or verticals that, seemingly would not be a fit for remote work, or maybe they would have initially thought, I don't think we can do this, and now they've sort of been forced into it, and oh, well, what do you know? It works. Like, are there examples of companies that are really kind of making a transformational shift in a way that is that is overcoming a huge challenge?
Sure. I have a client that is, this client lays cement foundations in Chicago. So he has about 4 crews that are just constantly laying, large high-rise cement foundations. And he realized that logistically, about 50% of his team could work remotely. So he had a big office, people that were prepping quotes, people that were prepping the crews, all that kind of stuff, and realized that he could have digitized all of that. So he did. And he ended up shaving 22% off of his bottom line just by doing that and getting exactly the same output out. So fundamentally, if you can do it in front of a computer, you can do it, right? So secretaries, customer service reps, accountants, business operations specialists, office clerks, supervisors, sales reps, anyone doing that type of work is fundamentally going to be able to go remote. But obviously, we're going to have construction, cooks, landscaping, housekeepers, nursing staff, all that kind of stuff. That's not going to change, but that actually is not the majority of the economy. The largest employer by category in the United States is retail, which is pretty crazy. And unfortunately, if you're working in retail right now, prep to leave because Amazon is coming for you and they're going to remove you from the economy. There will not be malls as we understand them today, or even big box stores as we understand them today within the next 10 years. Fundamentally for me, and you should always kind of look at tech to see what's going to happen in the next couple of years. Almost everything, and again, because of COVID, everything comes to me through Amazon Prime, right? I just recently had a daughter. Amazon Prime is delivering literally just-in-time diapers constantly to my house, right? Where I don't have to even worry about it. And this is going to be the future of the economy, and it's cheaper than me going into any single big box store. So that's going to be over. I think that there are some categories that will stay open, but fundamentally, I would probably say, if I kind of had to have a gun to my head, 75% of the jobs that are classically in person will no longer exist within the next 10 years, and they will move digital.
Yeah, that's wild. So obviously, a lot of companies are trying to make this shift successfully, and I think a lot are doing a pretty good job. I've heard a lot of success stories from you and others. But there's struggles, and there's as we mentioned, sort of barriers to get past. I read an article in the New York Times recently that was, I guess, sort of a counterpoint to the positives of remote work, and they examined sort of some case studies. I know one of the examples they cited was Best Buy, which is a local company here in Minnesota. They did an experimental pilot where they did remote work, I think like 7 years ago, and they kind of considered it a failure. What do you see as kind of the mistakes that companies are making that is preventing them from finding success in this setting, and how can they maneuver around that as they are maybe kind of forced into it now?
This is something that I've really been interested in, because that was one of the reasons why we started Running Remote, our conference on remote work, because I wanted to basically figure out a playbook that you could give to someone. And in essence, that is what Running Remote is. If you ever show up to one of our events, it is, how can you build and scale a remote team fast, or faster than we did the year previous, right? So we're constantly trying to learn different things. And one of the biggest insights that I've had was pre-COVID, and probably post-COVID, everyone was doing something different in terms of their operational processes and their strategies, but they were still generally successful. The data is quite clear. About 90% of people that go remote end up sticking with it because they find it a very successful business model. But there are absolutely companies that don't do it right, and Best Buy is a perfect example. When I look at the two biggest variables that affect that, it is communication and process documentation. It can literally be boiled down to that if you really want to kind of define two major categories. So communication, you need to be able to communicate on purpose. So remote teams, there is no water cooler walk down the hallway. Hey, Jimmy, what's going on? Oh, can you talk to me about those TI-83 reports? That doesn't exist inside of remote teams. All these meetings have to be produced on purpose. So what you need to do is get on Zoom, get on Skype, get on Google Meet, do a video call, get as rich a communication as humanly possible. I have what I like to call the hierarchy of communication, which is in-person beats video, video beats audio, audio beats instant messaging, and instant messaging beats email. As you move up the chain, you become more synchronous in your communication, meaning the feedback loop becomes faster. As you move down the chain, you become more asynchronous, meaning you can actually focus more on your major task, but you don't necessarily have to respond to something very, very quickly. And each of them has their own place dependent upon the situation. So if I have, let's say, 10 instant messages that go back and forth on Slack, I will literally jump on and say, let's do a Zoom call quickly to just kind of figure out what we need to do and why we're seeing a particular barrier, because I'm getting more of a synchronous version of communication occurring. Outside of that, you also need to measure all your metrics, right? So like it blows me away inside of on-premise companies, because we've never had, like, remote first companies, we always have to report our metrics every single week. I have a quantitative number that every single employee is responsible for, and it needs to be reported weekly. And it's either green, yellow, or red. I don't talk about greens. If you're yellow or red, why are you not green? Let's discuss it, and let's try to make a course correction as quickly as humanly possible. When I've seen large corporations, particularly a company like Best Buy, I know they aren't running those types of processes inside of their organization. Outside of that, once you get all of that communication down and you have a good sync, then you need to actually build out process documentation, which is something that Best Buy probably has and a bunch of other large corporations have. But if you're a small company, you probably don't have it, which is the documentation, digitization, and distribution of absolutely everything that you do inside of your organization. I'll give you a small story connected to that. We had one of our clients, that ended up quitting our product because one of our employees had a signature in the bottom of her emails that was a Bible verse. And regardless of whether you're religious or not, this person was not, and was very angry about that and ended up quitting due to that Bible verse being in the signature. So we recognized, well, we need to be agnostic towards all religions, and we need to be able to make sure that we built a process for how to sign your email signature, what's applicable and what isn't applicable. That's what I'm talking about when we're talking about process documentation, because Johnny may be sitting right next to you in an on-premise company, and you can tell Johnny, hey, you know what? I think putting the John 3:16 Bible verse is probably not a good idea, because Liam might get frustrated at that because of this story that I heard before, versus Johnny being 10,000 miles away and making his own decision on that type of information. A fantastic cheat code, because building processes is like doing your taxes. No one wants to do it. If you go to about.gitlab.com/handbook, GitLab has the largest remote first process documentation repository on planet Earth. It's 3,200 pages. Absolutely everything that you could possibly know about GitLab is in there. They're a complete open book. They also sponsored Running Remote, and they even have the email exchanges of our negotiation for sponsorship that's open source there. So their entire organization is open source, and they encourage you to steal all of that process documentation and use it for yourself. So literally just go there, figure out the stuff that you think is interesting, cut and paste it, either build your own GitLab repository, or more importantly, just sort of bring it over to Google Docs if it's really easy to do that. We use a tool called Trainual, which is really easy. It's a purchase tool or a paid tool to be able to do process documents professionally. But fundamentally, if you have those two things, you're ready to go. You're doing 90% better than basically everyone that's trying to go remote right now.
Oh, that's a great resource. Thank you for sharing. So I think we're seeing a lot of new solutions and tools kind of emerge in this to facilitate this remote work environment. I think Time Doctor is a great example of that. At TopRank, we've worked with a company called Sococo, which runs a virtual office platform to kind of visualize an office layout and recreate that. Are there any other sort of solutions, whether it's a specific product or maybe just a category, that you really see emerging here and becoming really critical to this ongoing future?
You know, Sococo is a perfect example. A lot of companies right now, Remo, Sococo, I know the founder quite well of Sococo, and he was going to speak at Running Remote. He's in Austin, Texas. That space is interesting, of cracking the office feel virtually. I also think, and to kind of go super broad, virtual reality is probably going to be, for anyone that hasn't used the Oculus Quest yet, get one or play with it. They've cracked it, and they are now going to, I think that within the next 5 to 6 years, you're going to have that type of an environment where you're going to have Zoom calls, but they're going to be virtual, and they're going to be in real rooms, and they're going to be real people. I know that they're very close to cracking that. Payroll, right? Remote work payroll is huge. Remote.com is a massive leader in that space. They actually ended up sponsoring Running Remote as well. Very boring business model. However, you need to actually pay people, and you need to be able to pay them legally. I'll give you another small story connected to that. There are very large corporations right now. A lot of them are clients of ours, where some of those employees are what are called digital nomads. So people that work from their computer, but they don't have a particular address, right? So they travel constantly around the world. And this was obviously pre-COVID. There are countries now that are suing those corporations, saying, you owe us payroll taxes because that employee was in my particular country for more than 6 months, as an example. So you need to be able to figure out the logistics of that moving forward. Project management is fundamentally almost done. And I don't want to say it's quote unquote done, because I thought that it was done with Skype. Then Zoom popped up and just completely obliterated that business model. But there's so many project management options that are out there right now. I also think in our space, and again, I don't want anyone to get into our space in terms of time tracking, but the reality of measuring productivity, and fundamentally measuring productivity, not necessarily seeing how long someone worked, but how can you measure how productive you're deploying your time, is really important. So as an example, at Time Doctor, one of our biggest suggestions to clients is, it looks like your employees are working too long and not effectively. They need to work less hours and more effectively, which is very counterproductive to the industrial revolution 9-to-5 mindset, which really doesn't work. And the reason why we actually had that 9-to-5 mindset was fundamentally because we were putting people in a factory. Well, we're not putting people in factories anymore. Work is different. So analyzing that data and recognizing how you can make people more productive, I think is another big growth opportunity as well.
Awesome. Fantastic stuff. So switching gears a little bit from the industry and the overall remote work space to sort of you and your path, I think a lot of people in our audience are interested in maybe moving into that area of being a real subject matter expert in the place where they're operating, or being, influential. Could you talk a little bit about sort of your personal brand building and sort of the steps you've taken to make yourself, you really are one of the subject matter experts I think of with remote work. What kind of steps did you take to get to that point?
Well, thanks a lot. That's a great compliment. Boy, you know what? I think I kind of just fell into it because I'm very passionate about the subject matter. So I think probably step one is if you're like, man, I want to be the TikTok influencer. I want to learn how to, get people ranked on TikTok. Do you like TikTok? I kind of do, but like not really, like not enough to be able to spend the next 5 years of my life talking about TikTok. And it might get banned anyways. So you really have to figure out a lane that you're passionate about. And even if, especially all the content that we put out, I said to myself, well, I wish I had learned this 5 years ago. And let's document that and then put that up there so that the me of 5 years ago that's currently watching that content could say, oh, yeah, okay, I can now build a bigger and better business because of that. I think that's pretty much the fundamental rule towards putting out content. And then also just being a portal for that type of information is really important. I think if you do those two things, you fundamentally will inevitably find an audience. And even if it's an audience that's very, very small, there's a great article that you can Google called 1,000 True Fans. Just Google that. And basically the concept is, could you get 1,000 people super passionately excited about what you're doing? So you should always start with figuring out, so let's say we want to talk about remote work, too big, because more than 1,000 people are super passionate about that, right? So you need to narrow it down to say, even with us, with regards to running remote, everyone thought we were crazy when we ran a conference about remote work from the employer perspective and not include digital nomadism. Because that was almost entirely the conversation 3 years ago, which was, hey, you're traveling the world, you're living on a beach, you're doing the 4-hour work week. And we said to ourselves, we don't want to do that. We don't want to have those talks involved. We ended up setting a price point, which was $1,000, which was significantly more expensive than anyone that would classically go to a digital nomad conference would pay. And they actually got really angry at us, but that was by design because we only wanted to target a very small group. We actually have an avatar, which is a real person, is Amir, who is the founder of Todoist. And he's a remote first company. He has, Todoist has employees in like 30 plus countries. They have about 150 employees inside of their organization. And we would literally ask Amir, well, who would you like to see at the conference? And he would list the people that he would like to see at the conference. And we focused on that really, really small niche. And then very selectively, we started to expand it very, very, almost kind of like the layers of an onion. So get super laser focused on something. If you're talking about, like, let's say you want to do SEO, well, I might even just say I'm going to do AI SEO as an example, which is a major niche that's expanding right now, right? The future of blogging may very well be destroyed by these AIs that can write articles that are indistinguishable from Google versus a regular human being. So that's an interesting subject. If you really want to get super into that, that would probably be something that you could build out that niche and then you could expand out on it over a couple of years.
Awesome. That is great. Thank you so much for sharing that perspective. If people want to get in touch with you, engage with you in some way as an influencer or sort of pick your mind and get more insight, what's a good way to get in touch with you?
YouTube.com/runningremote. We put out content there every single week. We also have all of our talks up for free. So that's another big fundamental of running remote is we said to ourselves, we really want to have this information up for everyone and for free. So if you can't afford to go to the conference, you can at least get the content. So it's all up there for free. Outside of that, just sort of hitting me up inside of that community is probably the best way to do it. We actually are running our next online conference August 12th. So if you just go to runningremote.com, you can sign up for free. You can get access to the free tier. Literally, we do like 30 to 40 talks throughout one day. So we have multiple stages and you can kind of zip around and it's everything connected to how to build and scale a remote team. The most exciting person we have actually, well, I don't want to say that because maybe the other people will get angry, but we have the CEO of Reich, who is a project management system. They have 1,500 employees and they just took their entire team remote and they're saying they're never going back. So it's really interesting to kind of see, like, how do you take 1,500 people remote? What were the problems associated with that? where were your fails? Where were your successes? Where do you think you are right now? And why are you not going back to the previous business model? So he's actually bringing all his receipts and going to break down his P&L and say, like, this is why we're not going back. We have an increase in productivity, but we actually just save about 30% of our costs.
Great. Well, I hope some people will come check out the Running Remote conference. Did you say this is the first one you're doing virtually?
No, this is our third one that we're doing virtually.
Okay.
We've been busy. So we've been really focused on really putting out as much content as possible, because we believe that that is the thing that we can do now that at least helps the most, particularly with COVID. And post-COVID, who knows what we're going to do. But as of right now, we're just putting out as much content as possible, because that's what we think people need.
Beautiful. So to kind of tie back to the theme of the show here, we're trying to help business leaders and professionals kind of break free from what might be constraining them. So if we had to sort of summarize the essence of what it takes to get past these barriers with remote work and really optimize and move into this future in a strong way, how would you sort of summarize your recommendations on that front?
Do it, try it. So pre-COVID, I would have told everyone, hey, you know what? Why don't you make a couple people remote, or why don't you make a department remote? Can't do that right now. You got to jump in full on, right? And if you're not already remote, you're probably not going to do that, because we've been in COVID for, 4 or 5 months. But fundamentally, measure your metrics, create very clear documentation of all of your processes, and communicate effectively with your team. If you can do those 3 things, and people can continuously report metrics to you, regardless of whether you're using a tool like Time Doctor or even you're using an Excel spreadsheet, defining those metrics and saying, I got X amount of leads today, and this is on target for my Q3 goal, that's going to be great. You're going to be doing better than 90% of people. And even if you choose to go back inside of an office, those things that you've done are fundamentally going to make your company run faster.
Outstanding stuff. All right. Well, thank you so much, Liam, for joining us. Ton of great knowledge and insight here. Make sure you check out Time Doctor, Running Remote. Check out the YouTube channel, everyone. And we'll be back with another episode in the near future. Liam, thanks again so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.